Please note, due to the sensitive nature of today's episode, we have beeped out the names of certain parties mentioned in this podcast to protect their identities.
You strike a woman, you strike a rock. It's Women's Month, and we want to take this opportunity to shine light on the stories we don't often tell. There's great power in sharing. It helps us to understand the past, carry forward the lessons, and impart wisdom to those who may be finding themselves or a loved one in a similar position. My guest today has faced a fair share of trials. She's lost friends and family to gangsterism, drugs, and the perpetuated and toxic neighborhood environment she grew up in. She recalls not having much, but through perseverance and saying yes even when it scared her, she's made strides she never dreamt of. 11 years ago, Khadija Jafta started as an administrator for the country's largest debt counseling firm, and now occupies a seat at the executive table as the head of negotiations and fulfillment. So Khadija, I think I want to start off by just chatting about your childhood, like where you grew up.
So yeah, I grew up in Bridgetown, so that was in that area, so in the Athlone area. And yeah, like I said, we didn't really have our own house until probably first year of varsity. Lived with a lot of different people from what I can remember, and it was mostly family, but also quite a few like family friends. And so it was in the circle, everybody knew each other, and that was it.
I think that's one thing about these communities is that there's always a sense of family and everybody knows everybody and everybody's child is everybody's child. I want to touch on one thing that you said about living in different homes, sometimes with family and sometimes with family friends. What would you say is one of the reasons that you moved around as much as you did?
So I think living with other people in general is complicated. And like from what I can remember, the biggest challenge for us with living with other people was always being in other people's space, and so you always feel like you're imposing on their space. And you'd live with somebody or some family or some friend, and you'd live there for like a couple of months, if you're lucky maybe 2 or 3 years, and it get to a point where that imposition just got too much. And so either there would be an altercation or an expectation that wasn't met, or just like something simple that would upset somebody, and then we'll just pack up and leave, or people would actually ask us to leave. That's probably why we moved around quite a lot. And there was sometimes, maybe 1 or 2 times, when people actually asked us to come back to where we were living before. And so in the circle, we lived in maybe 3-4 homes, but we didn't live there just once. Like sometimes we'd actually go back to the same house after a couple of years. So we did live in some of the homes more than once.
Is it because of financial reasons? Because you obviously didn't have your own house at the time, and you perhaps couldn't pay or commit to paying rent every month?
I don't really remember what the financial situation was, right? Because it was between the adults. So my mommy would always discuss it. So I grew up with a single mom. She took care of us, myself and my brother, and she provided for everything. Like we knew she was struggling, we knew there wasn't enough, but she never made us feel that way. And so she always covered up, and if she needed to split us and like send the brother somewhere and send me somewhere, or like I'd maybe stay with one uncle and the brother stayed maybe with somebody else, she'd do that if it meant that she could save a few rands. I think the biggest arrangement, if I could call it that, with the people that we lived at was not necessarily paying rent, but more covering costs. For example, maybe my mother would cover all of the groceries, whereas the other people that lived in the house paid the electricity and the rates and all of that stuff. I remember one specific house that we lived in where it was my mommy's responsibility to cover the groceries, but even though she was buying the groceries, we still needed to ask permission to get the food, because obviously it's not our fridge, right? So she's buying the groceries, it's going into the fridge, but it still belongs to the people that we were living with. If we came from school and we maybe wanted to make us a sandwich, or we wanted a slice of bread or a cup of coffee, we always needed to ask for it. And so I think that's again where the imposition came in. Even though she was covering it and she was technically buying it, it still wasn't ours.
There's a lot of things that you're saying that resonate with me growing up, not particularly moving around a lot, but being aware of the fact that there was a struggle, but also very sheltered or protected. I had my mom and my dad together, obviously, but my dad was the only one who was working. So, there was that constant thing that was overhanging, but we still weren't ever made to feel like we didn't have enough, like myself and my brother, obviously. You spoke about being split from your brother, if that meant that your mom could save even just a little bit more. What was that like as a girl? You want to be around your mom whenever there's something that's weighing you down, or you're going through, you know, the different stages of being a teenager. Do you remember what that was like, living, even if it was just for a couple of months, without your mom?
One thing about me is actually I don't remember a lot of my childhood. And I think that's been probably an advantage and disadvantage for me, because I chose to block out a lot of memories so that I could focus on the future, basically. And so I do remember certain parts, but maybe not everything. So the one time when we were split up, so my mother was living in the circle, like in the corner, at the one house that we actually stayed at most of our childhood. My brother was living down the road and I was living in Q-Town with my uncle. And the reason why we needed to do that was because that was when I was at high school. And so when I attended high school, I was fortunate enough to get a bursary from grade 8 until matric. Part of the bursary included transport that they covered. And the transport couldn't come all the way to Bridgetown. And so my uncle, conveniently enough, lived on the outskirts of Jansmat, so in Q-Town. And so I lived there so that I could catch the transport as soon as possible. And so in that sense, we also saved in that aspect. But then I think it was challenging not to have her there, but I always felt that she made sure that we were okay, and I always understood why. I don't think I was too sad about it, because I would see her on weekends. Like, she'd sometimes pop in after work. It wasn't that difficult because I understood why it needed to be done.
And how old were you at that time?
I want to say grade 9. I was grade 9, so standard 7 back in the day. Not sure what age that was. I think it's like 12, 13.
Okay. I think you're probably a little bit older, about 14, turning 15. I mean, if I recall high school, it's like you're finding yourself and you've got a whole new world ahead of you, and you're starting to think about dreams and hopes for the future, and you've got all these teachers talking to you about what to study. There's a lot of things that happen at that age in any child's life. But I want to go back very quickly. You spoke about, you think that blocking was your coping mechanism in a way.
I think if it wasn't for me blocking it out, obviously I don't know what the future could have been like, right? I'm fortunate in how it turned out. But there are times when I remember stuff, and when it does come back, it does bring back the memories and the pain and all of the emotions that you felt at that time. And so I think because I was able to block out a lot of stuff, I was able to also move forward. But I do think that if I had the opportunity to remember everything, I'd choose probably to do it, because I do want to understand everything that happened and try and work through it, because I blocked it out, but it's still there. Like,
absolutely, and it shapes subconsciously. It actually shapes a lot of decisions you make,
exactly,
because those things live there.
So I think bringing it into the consciousness, and having the opportunity to work through it instead of just pushing it back all the time, I think that's probably why I say it's a disadvantage.
This is obviously a very, very important conversation for me. It's quite a personal one for me as well, because I know you personally, and I thought it was such a wonderful story despite circumstances, because you and I both have grown up in perhaps areas that were not deemed to be very safe or secure, and we both have lost family members as well as friends to certain lifestyles and situations, some of which we feel like could have been controlled, and others which we feel like the person just didn't stand a chance. I grew up in between Lavender Hill, Hanover Park and Mitchell's Plain. But I remember seeing some pretty gruesome things as a kid, and it became part of my life. Like, I knew there was either going to be a shooting or stabbing or something was going to happen, and that was just the way it was. I think, when you see it a lot, maybe not as a kid, but as a teen especially, you kind of almost become desensitized to it, because that's just the way things are. How much of that kind of situation and circumstances do you think actually impacted you?
Obviously, when you're growing up, there's your primary school days, then there's the high school, then it's varsity. And so with primary school, we were children, right? Like, we weren't exposed to necessarily the violence and the gunshots and the stabbings. Like, you knew what was going on in the background. You would lay in bed, something was going on outside. You didn't necessarily get involved or go outside to see what was happening. But I was exposed, I think, in primary school days to, I would say, more the drug addiction side of the areas that we live in. And so a lot of friends, a lot of family members being exposed to that and involved in it. And it wasn't necessarily something that impacted me that much because I was still a child. But when you go to high school, and because I was fortunate enough to get the bursary, I obviously went to previously Model C school. Like, the high school experience for me was an eye-opener, because that was a completely different world. Like, people spoke differently, People carried themselves differently. They spoke about different things. And they dressed differently. Like, it was a very different culture. And so I think high school had already opened up that can of worms, if I could say, to be like, okay, look, there's actually something else out there. But even then, because you're still living in the area that you do, it's like you're living two lives. So you go to school, you live one life, you see this like amazing other side of how people live, and then you come back home and you're like, oh no, back to normal. And so a lot of my friends, really, really close friends that I grew up with, they weren't obviously at that school, and so I was the only one there. So it was very difficult for me to just live two lives, because at school I was one person, at home I needed to be a different person. I constantly found myself having to switch between the two. And I think in high school, you're becoming a teenager. And at the time, there was a lot of gangsterism going around. And it was the in thing, right? Like, everybody wanted to be part of a gang. And it could have been just like a small gang. And so it's just like a group of friends. They maybe all dance together, and so they're a gang. Or it could be as serious as like a actual, very well-known, notorious, in prison kind of gang. And so a lot of my friends went into that life. A lot of family members that I know went into that life. And I think for me it was more just dabbling between the two lives and just basically deciding, you know what, which side is it that I want to go to. And so it was always trying to write down, list everything. Okay, this is all the good things here, all the good things there. And not taking away anything from my childhood, because it basically shaped me to who I am. And like, I don't think I take away anything from that, but they did open my eyes to a lot of things and a lot of just characters and characteristics that I didn't want, or I didn't want to be, or I didn't want to go through. And so a lot of my upbringing was not like, oh, thinking about the future and the goals and what is it that I want to study. It was, okay, I don't want to do this, I don't want to be that, I don't want to go there. So it was more the opposite that drove me to where I am. It was never about, oh, I'm going to get this job, or I'm going to drive that car, because it wasn't possible, right? It's not something you think about.
So, like, I had so many thoughts as you were talking now, but you talk about making lists, so pros and cons, and I'm very similar, and living that two lives. So I went to a school in my area. It got its own name from the community as being a place for gangsters. So I know what that's like. But you talk about at some point you had to make a decision and to say like which way you're going to go. Was that like a conscious thing? Because for me, I've always had the drive where I know I want to be. But what I'm hearing from you is that it was almost easier to say, this is what I not want. And kind of just journey forward, and then from there kind of take the pieces that you do want. And even though I agree with you where you say you wouldn't change your childhood, I wouldn't change mine for anything. But I do feel quite strongly with the fact that growing up, I had to unlearn a few things. So like you said, you started realizing that there were some characteristics that you wanted to take forward, and there were things that you didn't. Do you recall perhaps one or two things that, despite being really grateful for the childhood that you did have, because like you say, it shaped you, was there maybe one or two things that you had to unlearn, or put a stop to, or walk away from, or, you know, change your view on in order to go forth with this different life?
I can't really say what the one or two things is that like stands out for me. I can recall the time when I made the choice. My friends, we always wanted to do things on weekends, and so we were involved with a lot of different people. We used to always go to Grand West on a Saturday night, or maybe not every Saturday, maybe every second Saturday or every last Saturday of the month, we'd go to the ice rink, and we just like chill there. And so we got exposed and involved with a lot of different people, and a lot of people that were in gangs. There was one night where I wanted to go with my friends, and for some reason my mother this time said no. And they weren't actually going to Grand West. They were going with a few friends that they had met, and they were going for the drive to Saldanha or something, for the car races.
Yes.
I remember the next day I found out that the friends that I was meant to go with was in a car accident. From the accident, one of my friends was actually paralyzed from the waist down, and she still is today. But she's doing very, very well. And then there was, I think they were playing a game of Russian roulette.
Wow.
I can't even remember. And she had shot herself. The combination of those two events, I was just like, no, this is definitely the one I'm not taking. And so that's when I consciously decided, okay, do this, do that. You know, like, go this way instead of that way. And a lot of friends didn't understand why, but like, I didn't think at that point I needed to explain it. Up until today, I'm like, it was the right decision to make.
Sure, that's incredible. So you spoke about the drug side, the side that you were more exposed to. Did you ever really get close enough to it? Like, were you around people who chose that life?
Yeah.
We know about peer pressure, right? We remember being teenagers. Wasn't too long ago. But I can only imagine for someone starting out, like, becoming a teenager and succumbing possibly to peer pressure along the way. Like, was it hard for you to stay away from it at some points? I know you consciously made the decision not to go that way, but were there moments where you were confronted with either the gangsterism side, the drug side, whatever it was, that you almost got caught up in a way?
I'm going to address like the different issues that you mentioned. So when it comes to drugs, 100% not. I don't know what it was, but I was always exposed to it, whether it was a party drug, whether it was cocaine that was going and everybody was awake. Like, I was never ever fascinated with it. Like, it was never, ooh, I want to try that. I don't know why. I think it was probably because I'd seen so many family members in my primary school years go through it, and what it did to them, I was like, I've seen this before. Like, I'm not gonna even try it because I know where it goes.
Where it can lead.
Where it can lead. And so for me, because I'm a very logical person, I'm not gonna do something if it doesn't make sense. I'm like, what's the point? And so drugs for me just never fancied me at all. So I'm lucky in that sense, in that even though I think all of us succumb to peer pressure, for me, I had something stronger pulling me back. And so it was either I don't want to disappoint my mother, or I don't want to end up like this one, or I'm going to end up in hospital. Anything can go wrong. Like, you watch movies and you see people doing drugs and they overdose. Like, why would you want to do it? And so rationalizing that in my head, I didn't see myself doing it. When it comes to, I think, gangsterism was a completely different story. And so I actually was quite involved with a lot of people that were in gangs.
Okay.
Naturally, when you start dating in your teens, you tend to also date in those circles. And so I dated quite a lot of guys that was also in gangsterism. And so one of the guys that I actually dated, he was also killed. So there was a lot of like pivotal moments in my life. I did date a few guys that were in gangs, and a lot of my family was in there, a lot of my friends was in there. It is something that in our community is a driving force behind a lot of stuff that's happening. For children and for youngsters, like, that's what they see. And so they see gangsterism as the opportunity to get the money, as the opportunity to wear the nice clothes, the name brands, to go places, to drive the fancy cars. So with me, it was like, I saw the gangsterism, I saw what they were getting, but I also saw the other side, and I think like everything just added together, and I chose the other side because even though they had the money was for today. Because it could be taken away, and I saw it taken away within the blink of an eye. It's gone. Whereas if you actually build yourself, get a job, save your money, put money away, like make the proper financial decisions, like the money's there for the long term, or at least for a couple of months. You know, you could survive. Whereas on the other side, it literally disappears within a matter of seconds.
And not having to have the guilt as well, right? Is not have to worry about looking over your shoulder and where it came from. And I obviously knew about gangsters and heads of gangs, and I would see them on the corners doing their things. But the one thing I always knew is that it wasn't very easy to walk away from those situations. Twofold. One, because of what you said, the false promise of a family, the false promise of having everything you ever wanted and needed. But then the actual leaving was almost considered a crime. Obviously, all those pivotal moments you spoke about was the reason for you moving away. But was it easy for you to do that?
Most of my relations with gangsterism was either via family or friends or guys that I was dating. I would say it was much easier for me to walk away than it is for a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay. Khadija, I feel like we've already gone through so much, but I want to come back. I think maybe one last question before we fast forward into your life a little bit. Was it really difficult when you entered your high school, which was now a very different realization compared to that life that you had, or the other life that you had? Was it difficult keeping up in a way? Because obviously you weren't financially free or stable. And I would imagine because you got the bursary, you obviously perhaps didn't get money to sustain a certain kind of life, right? Your bursary was to pay for your education and your transport, like you said. But what was it like now socializing with teens from perhaps more affluent areas who are now getting money for school and they're going out on a weekend and they're inviting you along. Like, do you recall that?
So my first year of high school actually was the hardest, I think, because when I got there, I quickly realized that these people are very different. Like, I'm nothing like them. They're speaking about different things. This is a very different crew. And I shut myself out completely. I think in the first couple of months of high school, I probably cried every day. I was like, I don't have any friends.
Yeah.
I don't know what to speak to them about. Like, I can't associate myself with them. Like, it's very difficult. And I think I was very, very close to getting my mother to put me into a high school where I knew people.
Wow.
I really didn't want to be there. It was a very difficult time in grade 8. I had 0 friends. I didn't want to speak to anyone. So even though people tried speaking to me, like, I didn't want to.
Did you perhaps feel like you were just not worth it? Like you felt... I just didn't belong. And
I didn't belong. I felt again like I was imposing this time, not in somebody's house, but now at school. Now I'm imposing. And so I didn't feel confident enough. I didn't feel good enough. And so I didn't play any sports at high school. I don't know if people actually invited me. I should ask some of them. I still speak to some of them.
Okay.
But I think I really started making friends probably towards the end of my grade 9 year. And that's when I started, like, you're in this, you're not getting out of it.
Yeah.
You're going to be here for 5 years, like, buckle up, get yourself in order. And so I think, like, towards the end of grade 9, I started making friends, brilliant group of girls, also very diverse.
Okay.
And I think they just allowed me to be myself and they accepted me as myself. And even though I wasn't able to bring the name brands, I think there was like one time I was telling them like, oh, I'm not doing casual wear because like it's like everybody dresses up, whatever. And all of us decided to come in our school clothes on that day.
And they came
with their school clothes on, and we were the only people on the school that came in school clothes.
What a statement. And that must have felt really good to you, eh?
Yeah.
Supportive.
Yes.
Sure. That's incredible. So you went through high school, you finished,
yes,
right?
Finished.
What happened next? Because now I'd imagine you had a bursary for high school. You did well? Did you do fairly okay at school?
Yeah,
okay.
fairly okay.
Okay.
Not great, fairly okay.
Okay. That's fine. I did terrible at school. But then where to from there?
Yeah. So, like, to be honest, what a lot of people don't realize is that when growing up in communities like I did, you are not given this hope of university. Like, you don't know what this thing is called, right?
I know exactly what you mean.
You've never been exposed to it, you've never heard of it. And so when I went to this school, it's all everyone started speaking about. And I was like, oh, what is this thing called university? Like, I've never heard of it before. You have to actually study again.
10?
What do you mean?
Yes.
I've been in school 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, I thought I was done because
Yeah.
you finish matric and everyone's excited. You have your matric dance and then you start working.
Yeah.
Like, that is the norm. And so as I approached obviously the end of my matric year, I didn't really know what to expect, not having the money to actually study further. I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to bother applying until I spoke to a very, very, very good friend of mine's uncle.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for this man, like, I cannot thank him enough.
Yeah.
He was the one that told me, even if you don't have the money, just apply because you can get the money later.
Okay.
I was like, what do you mean? How can I get the money later? Where is it going to come from? Because if you didn't have it, you didn't have it. Like, it's not just going to come out of nowhere, right? Money doesn't grow on trees. It's what they told us when we were growing up.
Yeah.
And he was like, Khadija, just apply, like, just do it. And at that point where he had finally convinced me to apply, it was too late to apply to the university that I wanted.
Okay.
And so I had to choose my second option. So I applied at UWC. Firstly, didn't know what I was going to study.
Okay.
Didn't know how I was going to pay for it, but I applied.
And you applied for what?
I applied for BCom General because
Okay.
it was the most general thing to do.
Just look for the word general.
Yeah,
Okay.
so at high school I really enjoyed accounting, but I also enjoyed physics and chemistry. And oddly enough, I remember now. So the guys that gave me, or the company that gave me the bursary for high school from grade 8 to matric, they actually had a foundation. And at our graduating ceremony, we also, in addition to being at high school, there was also a commitment from everyone that got the bursary to attend Saturday classes every second Saturday.
Oh, wow.
For physics and maths. And so when we had like our ceremony ending for the classes, because of my marks during the classes, they had actually offered me a bursary to study engineering at Stellenbosch.
Wow.
And I said, no way. Like, there is no way I can leave where I'm living to study and live somewhere else. Like, it didn't make sense to me. I was so scared. I didn't think I'd ever survive. I didn't think I'd ever make it. And if I could, that's probably the only thing I change, is I take that opportunity. I think that's probably the only opportunity that I was given that I didn't take. Because I was given a lot of opportunities. I was fortunate in that sense. It didn't just fall out of nowhere. Like people gave me the opportunity and I took it. And so I didn't take that opportunity. And if I could turn back time, I'd probably do that. But I am where I am today because I chose the other path.
Yeah.
And so I applied at UWC. Applied for BCom General because it was very broad. You could do General and then branch out into different stuff. So I was like, okay, cool, let me just get my foot in the door. I'll decide later.
Yes.
And then for the first 3 months of studying, I had no idea how I was going to pay for anything.
Wow.
I did not have any textbooks. But then you also, at lectures, you get the slides. Okay, so the lecturer goes through the slides, loads it on the portal, you get it from them, like from the portal, and then you have the slides at least. So that's all I had. And then the same friend's uncle that helped me, Uncle Gary, he helped me apply for a few bursaries and put me in touch with like the lady that's in charge of the financial support office at UWC. She also obviously then helped me apply for a few stuff, and I went for some interviews and I didn't get anything.
Okay.
And the last bursary that I applied for, they told me, you know what, like, we would have loved to give it to you, but we can't. And so now it's like approaching 6 months and I still don't know what I'm going to do. And obviously, like, they're not going to kick you out.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Like, it carries on and then you won't go to the next year. And so I remember I got an email or a phone call from the company I applied for the last bursary. And they called me and they said, the girl that they had given the bursary to dropped out from university. And I was second in line, and so I got it.
I actually literally have goosebumps right now.
And so I got a bursary for 3 years at UWC, and it covered my tuition and my books.
Wow.
Obviously, I needed to get myself there.
Yes.
And I needed to take care of my own lunches and all of that stuff, but it covered everything else, which was enough.
So you did 3 years.
Uh-huh.
Successfully through the bursary. What happened after that?
I got my degree and then started looking for jobs. Didn't find anything.
And what were you looking for at the time?
Anything.
Okay.
I actually ended up studying financial management. That's where I ended up in. So my degree is in BCom Finance. And I was applying for anything that had the word finance in it. So, back then there was like no LinkedIn. There was no Indeed. You on Gumtree, right? And you search finance. Yeah. That's it. Like, you're looking for anything financial. Clerk.
Yes.
Financial admin, anything that had finance in, that is what I was applying. And I applied at a lot of places, didn't get anything. I think I graduated in 2011, but obviously finished in December 2010.
Yes.
So from January, I was looking, applying, until eventually in October, I got a phone call from the company that I'm working for now, DebtBusters. Yeah. And which is currently the leading debt counseling firm in the country. Yes. So I got a phone call because obviously I had applied for a financial consultant. Yes. Because it had the word finance in it. And so I go for the interview. It's with the HR manager at the time. Yeah. And then I think the financial consulting's head of department. Okay. But this job required you to do a lot of talking on the phone. And giving advice on the phone and understanding people's situations and in order to explain the debt counseling program and the benefits of the debt counseling. And so the financial consultant wasn't really a fit for me at the time because I was very, very, very quiet. Still finding your voice. Yes. Yeah, building up all the confidence. So remember, I had come from nothing. Yeah. And got the bursary to go to high school, got the bursary to finish university, but I still didn't feel good enough, right?
Yeah.
And so got this job, like applied for it, and they told me like, actually, we don't think we can offer you this at the moment, but
Yes.
we are looking for administration consultants as well. Are you
Okay.
interested in applying? I said,
Yes.
that's the one. Send my name. Got called back for an interview on a Friday,
Okay.
and it was with the head of operations at the time.
Yeah.
Lovely guy, and he's still at the company actually.
Okay.
And so did the interview with him, and he explained the job to me. It was basically a filing assistant. So there was quite a few documents that the company had that needed to be scanned into the system.
Okay.
By quite a few, I mean massive
Okay.
amounts of documents. And I was like, you know what? It's the only people that came back to me.
Yes. It's a foot in the door.
It's a foot in the door.
Yeah.
They are actually serving a purpose in South Africa. I believe in what they do.
Yeah.
They stand for something that I want to stand for.
Yes.
And so I'm going to take it. So I was like, listen, I'm interested. And he's like, can you start on Monday?
Wow.
I said no, but I can start on Tuesday. I think I actually wore the same outfit to the different interviews. It was so funny. And then I started scanning documents.
And it's been 11 years.
11 years.
Khadija, what is your position at the company now?
I'm the head of fulfillment and collections at DebtBusters. 11 years later.
And you sit on the board of...
I sit on the board of executives with another 10 members. So yeah, it's been a very interesting journey. And I always think like, imagine I didn't say yes
Yeah.
when he said start on Monday, and I said no.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it was an entry level job.
Yeah.
I had studied. I thought it was going to be a financial something.
Yeah.
And then now I was a filing assistant. Needed to stand on my feet every single day, Monday to Friday, sometimes overtime,
Okay.
scanning documents.
You mentioned that if you had an opportunity to remember
Yes.
some of the things that you chose to block out, I think there might be nuggets of power in that, because one, you can only really heal when you know and when you actually face those things. Over and above that, I think you'll find a lot of value and reason as to why people that I know and you know look up to you as an inspiration. And I think it's because you haven't lost your true sense of self. I think you are so open with knowing exactly where you come from, even if you don't know where you're going, because I know you take things one step at a time.
Yeah.
Your list for everything, your pros and your cons, like you said. And obviously considering that it's Women's Month, there's something so powerful when someone, especially a woman, because I've always believed, and the consensus has always been that, you know, we've got to juggle a hell of a lot more sometimes than our male counterparts. And I genuinely feel that you are so real and authentic, and people can really relate to you, because there are thousands and thousands of people, you know, on the Cape Flats, for example, who have faced very similar situations and circumstances like you did and like I did. Although very different households and different experiences, there's a lot that makes us the same. And I think there's one thing that I've learned from you over the years is that you've always been very real. And no matter what I asked of you in terms of guidance or support or advice, you always brought it down to the nuts and bolts of the situation. You always told me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear. And I think there's great power in that. Yeah, this has been an incredible conversation, especially during the month of August, being Women's Month. The things that we as women around the world really, and in South Africa especially, have to face in order to thrive and to provide. Because we all know through the Money Stress Tracker that the company DebtBusters has actually launched, which is the first of its kind in the country, is that more women are now being faced with this over-indebtedness. One of the reasons is that there are more female-headed households. There are more women having to fend for dependents and to look after their families. It's not the case where it used to be, you know, many years ago, where naturally, you know, it was the male who was the provider. And so we have all these strong women who come from sometimes very broken backgrounds, but despite that, just made conscious choices along the way, even if they didn't know where it would get them. And you're one of those examples. So Khadija, I want to wish you all the best on whatever life has to offer you. And I think the one thing that I'm taking out of this today is just saying yes. Saying yes to opportunities, saying yes to people who build us up, saying yes even when it scares us, and sometimes saying even yes when we don't exactly know where we're going to head after that. But it's taking that step and acknowledging that you are worth it and that you have enough by being you to do and accomplish whatever it is that you want to. So I really want to take this moment just to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being so open and so sharing with us today, and I really wish you well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khadija.
I'm always so inspired by the stories that unearth the person behind the person. We walk around with all these layers that once peeled back reveal something you wouldn't have seen without a divine moment, such as the one Khadija and I shared. I recall seeing Khadija about 3 years ago for the very first time. And the first thing I said to her was, "What's your story?" Because sometimes you're able to connect with the essence of someone without really knowing them. I knew she had a powerful story. We all do. During our conversation, I learned that although our journeys are so very different, there are many aspects that make us exactly the same. For some, success is easily attainable, and for others, it's an uphill battle. Whatever your journey looks like, navigate it in a way that makes you proud. It never comes down to whether you win, but how you venture forward when circumstances try to hold you back. From me, Shafika Anthony, thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more episodes in the next coming months. Goodbye for now.